Could you actually wrap your head around the idea of strapping 600 people into a single flying machine that weighs more than a fully loaded freight train? And then casually lifting that whole thing off the ground because the world wants more seats? Hold that thought. Now picture yourself standing on the tarmac at Dubai International Airport. The desert heat is hammering down through the steel roof of the gate. Your security badge is clipped to your shirt, and you've been given 5 minutes to walk under the wing of an Emirates Airbus A380 before it pushes back. You step out onto the concrete, and the first thing that hits you isn't a sound, it's a shadow, because right in front of you sits a wall of metal that rises 8 stories into the sky, with a wingtip that hangs out into space like the side of an apartment building. You take another step forward and you can stand up straight under the wing without ducking. Easily. Above your head, that wing stretches almost 80 meters across, wider than the playing field of a soccer pitch. There are 4 engines mounted on it, and each one is so big you could almost park a small car inside the air intake. Up at the cockpit windows, 8 stories above the ground, 2 pilots are running through their pre-flight checklist, about to lift this entire flying city off the runway and carry it across an ocean. Now let's get to the question that's been bugging engineers, airlines, and aviation nerds for almost 3 decades. Why did anyone, at any point, decide that the world needed an airplane this big? And, more importantly, because this is where the story gets weird. Why is the industry, even after this exact aircraft quietly stopped production back in 2021, still chasing bigger and longer airliners? Stick with me. We're going to walk through this from the inside out. The plane in front of you is 72 meters long. Its maximum takeoff weight is 575 tons, and it rolls on 22 wheels split across 5 sets of landing gear. That's not a typo. 22 wheels. Because anything less and the runway concrete would literally crack under the load. Inside its 11 fuel tanks, this thing can carry around 320,000 liters of jet fuel, roughly 250 tons of liquid weight, just in fuel, and burn through it at about 12,000 liters every hour of cruise. The whole upper deck runs nose to tail, full length. No other airliner in history has that. Not the 747, not the 777X, not anything that came before it, or anything currently on the drawing board. Just the A380. A small but genuinely strange detail, a big chunk of the airframe isn't conventional aluminum. Airbus used a hybrid material called glare on a large scale for the first time in commercial aviation. It's a glass fiber reinforced aluminum laminate that's about 10% less dense than traditional aluminum, more resistant to fatigue, and dramatically slower to crack and corrode. Without that kind of material trickery, the plane would be too heavy to physically lift its own structure off the runway. That's the kind of constraint you're up against when you decide to build something this enormous. So once again, the question becomes, why? The honest answer starts with a number that almost nobody outside the industry actually knows. Between 1972 and 1998, global air passenger traffic grew at an average of about 6.1% per year. From 1998 through 2024, it averaged around 4.5% per year. And looking forward to 2050, the International Air Transport Association is projecting that global passenger demand will more than double from current levels, somewhere around 20.8 trillion revenue passenger kilometers in the central forecast. More than double. In a single generation. When you're sitting in an airline planning office and you're staring at growth numbers like that, you really only have 2 options. You can fly more flights, or you can fly bigger planes. Sounds simple? It absolutely isn't. Here's the trap. The world's biggest airports, Heathrow, JFK, Hong Kong, Tokyo Haneda, Dubai, Singapore Changi, they don't have unlimited room. Every single takeoff and landing is what's called a slot. And slots at these airports get traded for staggering amounts of money because the airport, physically and operationally, simply cannot fit another flight into the schedule. So if you cannot add more flights, your only remaining move is to put more passengers onto each flight that does happen. Which means a bigger plane. That, right there, is the entire reason the A380 was built. Airbus looked at those long-term traffic projections in the late 1990s, the same kinds of numbers that are still landing on planners' desks today, and made a giant strategic bet. The bet was that the world's biggest cities would only get more crowded. Slot pressure would only get worse. Long-haul demand between megahubs would explode. And someone needed to build a plane that could carry 500, 600, or in the most extreme single-class layout, up to 853 people in a single takeoff. Airbus formally launched the A380 program in December of 2000. The first prototype rolled out and flew on April 27, 2005. Singapore Airlines put the aircraft into commercial service on October 25, 2007, on flight SQ380 from Singapore to Sydney. And for a stretch there, it really did look like the future of long-haul travel. Stay with me on the upper deck for a second. You're walking down a quiet, wide aisle. The cabin feels nothing like a normal airplane. There's an actual sense of space. The ceiling curves above you. The windows are larger than what you're used to. On Emirates, you might pass an onboard bar where passengers are standing around drinking champagne at 40,000 feet. On Etihad, there used to be a private suite called the Residence, complete with a bedroom, a separate bathroom, and a living room. On Singapore Airlines, the suites have sliding doors and proper double beds. This isn't an airplane in the traditional sense of the word. It's a flying building. That experience, that feeling of stepping onto something that bends what an airplane is allowed to be, that's what airlines were selling. And passengers absolutely loved it. There's also a really specific reason Dubai became the spiritual home of the A380. Emirates currently operates the largest A380 fleet in the world by a wide margin, with over 110 of these aircraft active. And it works there for reasons that don't easily transfer to other airlines. Dubai sits almost perfectly between Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia, which makes it a near-ideal long-haul connecting point. The airline built terminals specifically optimized for double-deck boarding, with separate jet bridges for the upper and lower decks loading at the same time. Some Emirates A380 routes are absolutely brutal in terms of distance. The Dubai to Auckland flight, at around 8,800 miles, is the longest scheduled A380 service in the world. Other A380s fly legs as short as 2 hours, just because the volume of connecting traffic is so high. It's the kind of operation almost no other carrier on the planet has the geography or scale to copy. But this is where the story takes a turn that nobody at Airbus saw coming. The A380 didn't fail because it was too big. It failed because the world it was built for didn't quite show up. While Airbus was doubling down on what's called the hub and spoke theory, meaning huge planes feeding huge airports, Boeing made a completely different bet. Boeing predicted that the future wasn't going to be massive aircraft flying between mega hubs. The future was going to be smaller, smarter, twin-engine planes flying directly between secondary cities. Why connect through Frankfurt when you could just fly non-stop from Boston straight to Munich? Why route through Heathrow when you could just go straight from Madrid to Tokyo? No transfer needed. That bet became the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and a few years later, Airbus answered with its own twin-engine widebody, the A350. Both burn dramatically less fuel than a four-engine giant. Both can fly nearly as far as the A380, and both completely changed what passengers and airlines expected from long-haul travel. By the early 2020s, the math just stopped working for the A380. Four engines drink fuel at 12,000 liters per hour, even at 80 cents a liter. You're looking at fuel costs that some operators estimate add up to as much as $250,000 to top off the tanks for a single ultra-long-haul flight. The plane was so physically large that it could only operate at airports with reinforced gates, longer taxiways, and special infrastructure. And here's a detail almost nobody talks about. The underfloor cargo space on the A380 is actually smaller than what you get on a Boeing 777-300ER, because the second passenger deck eats into the belly of the aircraft, which meant airlines couldn't even reliably make money hauling freight on the side. Airbus delivered the very last A380 to Emirates in December of 2021, and the entire program closed with 251 aircraft built. For comparison, Boeing built 1,574 747s before that line shut down in 2023. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this and you'd like more of these deep aviation dives, hitting the like button and subscribing genuinely makes a difference for the channel. Okay, so if the A380 was too ambitious, why does Boeing now have a plane in the pipeline that's actually longer than the A380? This is where the 777X enters the conversation, and where the modern philosophy of building big becomes really interesting. The Boeing 777-9 The larger variant of the upcoming 777X family measures around 76.7 meters in length. That makes it longer than the A380, longer than the 747-8, longer than any commercial airliner ever produced in history. Its wingspan is 71.75 meters, which is wider than any 747 ever built. And it's powered by a pair of GE9X engines, which are flat out the largest and most powerful commercial jet engines ever installed on an airliner. Each fan is so wide that the diameter is bigger than the entire fuselage of a regional jet. But here's the trick, and it's a beautiful piece of strategy. The 777-9 is enormous in length. It is not enormous in everything else. It carries somewhere around 400 to 426 passengers in a typical airline configuration, significantly fewer than the A380's typical 500 to 615. It has only 2 engines, not 4. Its wingtips physically fold up at the gate so it can fit into the same airport stands designed for older 777s and 747s. And the fuel cost per seat is dramatically better than the A380. In other words, Boeing studied exactly what went wrong with the A380 and built something the existing world can already accommodate, instead of demanding the world reshape itself around the airplane. Build big, but build smart. Push capacity, but don't push the infrastructure to the breaking point. Comment below, by the way. If you had to choose between a flight on an A380 and a flight on a 777-9, which would you actually pick? Pure double-deck spectacle or modern twin-engine efficiency? I'm honestly curious what you'd go for. Now let's pull the camera back because there's a much bigger pattern hiding in all of this. Every single era of commercial aviation has had its biggest plane. The Boeing 707 was the giant of the early jet age in the 1960s. Then came the 747, which first flew in 1969, entered service with Pan Am in 1970, and absolutely dominated long-haul travel for the better part of 4 decades. Then came the A380, which took the crown in 2007. Now the 777-9 is preparing to take the title of longest airliner ever built. Each one of these aircraft was designed to answer the same fundamental question that has haunted the industry for 60 years. And the 747 deserves a quick detour here, because its story is almost the mirror image of the A380s. Boeing designed the 747 in the late 1960s for what it expected would be the future of aviation. The bet at the time was that supersonic transports were going to take over passenger travel, leaving subsonic jumbo jets free to evolve into giant cargo haulers. That's literally why the 747 has its iconic hump. The cockpit was placed above the main deck so the entire nose could swing open for cargo loading on freighter variants. The supersonic prediction never panned out commercially, but the 747 turned out to be exactly the right plane for the actual future that arrived, and it sold over 1,500 units across more than 5 decades of production. Boeing built the very last one in 2023. The A380, by contrast, was built almost 40 years later for a future that never quite materialized. Same gamble, different ending. How do we move more humans through a system that physically cannot expand fast enough to keep up? Because here's the dirty little secret of aviation. The actual hard limit isn't the airplane. It's the ground. You can build a bigger airplane. That part, engineers have basically figured out. What you cannot easily build is a bigger airport. You cannot extend Heathrow's runways without buying out half a London suburb. You cannot make Hong Kong's airport double in size when it's already on reclaimed land surrounded by ocean on every side. You cannot just casually slap another runway down at JFK or LaGuardia. Every meaningful gain in passenger throughput has to come from the air, not the ground. And the ground is full. So the engineers keep going. They keep finding ways to fit more seats, more efficiency, more range, more comfort into airframes that have to share space with a planet that hasn't gotten any bigger. The Boeing 777-9 isn't the end of this story either. There are concept studies floating around for blended wing-body aircraft that look more like flying triangles, with passenger cabins spread across the wing itself. There's serious research into hydrogen-powered jets. There are designs being kicked around for the return of supersonic commercial flight, and every one of these projects, in some way or another, is wrestling with the same question the A380 tried to answer. How do we keep up with a planet that keeps wanting to fly? Look at it this way. When the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk in 1903, Their machine carried one person and weighed only a few hundred kilograms. About 100 years later, the A380 was carrying over 800 people in a single takeoff and tipping the scales at 575 tons fully loaded. That's not just incremental progress. That's an exponential explosion driven by demand that just refuses to stop growing. Every decade, more people fly. Every decade, the cost per seat drops in real terms. Every decade, the planes get more capable. And the most fascinating part of all of this, we are still nowhere near the actual physical ceiling. Engineers will tell you that the limits we're hitting right now aren't really physical limits. They're economic limits and infrastructure limits. You could, theoretically, build a plane bigger than the A380 today. You really could. The Hughes H-4 Hercules, the famous wooden flying boat that Howard Hughes built and flew exactly once back in 1947, actually had a wider wingspan than the A380. The Stratolaunch carrier aircraft, which flew for the first time in 2019, has an even wider wingspan than the Hughes. We know how to build bigger. We just don't currently have the airports, the routes, the demand patterns, or the economics to justify another A380-sized leap. But what happens when we do? There's a real serious conversation happening right now in aerospace circles about whether the next big jump won't actually be a bigger conventional plane at all. It might be something completely different. Autonomous regional aircraft, electric short-haul jets that hop between secondary airport cities never had time to build runways for. Urban air mobility vehicles that bypass the traditional airport system entirely and let you take off from a rooftop. The pressure on the system might end up getting released sideways instead of upward. Instead of one giant plane carrying 1,000 people once a day, we might end up with 1,000 small autonomous aircraft flying constantly, running on electricity, taking off vertically, never even touching a runway. That's the strange thing about the original question. Why does the world keep building bigger airplanes? The honest answer might be that we won't for very much longer. Not the way we have been. The A380 might end up being remembered not as the start of a trend, but as the absolute high watermark of an entire era of aviation. The biggest passenger plane that ever existed, and very possibly the biggest passenger plane that ever will exist. Because if the projections hold, if global air passenger demand really does double by 2050, with most of that growth concentrated in the Asia-Pacific region, especially India and Indonesia and Vietnam, the industry doesn't actually have a luxurious set of choices in front of it. Either the planes have to get smarter, or the airports have to get bigger, or the entire concept of how humans get from point A to point B in the air has to be reinvented from scratch. To put that demand growth in concrete terms, India alone is forecast to add hundreds of millions of new air passengers over the next 2 decades, growing at over 6% per year. China's already hitting the ceiling of what its existing airport infrastructure can handle in major cities. African air markets are projected to grow at over 4% per year, with Nigeria alone potentially adding more than 100 million new flyers by the early 2040s. None of this happens with a fleet of small regional jets. None of this happens without either much bigger airports or much bigger planes. And given how hard it is to build a new airport, Berlin's Brandenburg Airport took 14 years to open. Mexico City's new airport went through years of political fights. The airline industry's default move is going to keep being the same one it's made for decades. Build bigger, build smarter, squeeze more capacity out of the airframe. And here you are, still standing on the tarmac in Dubai, looking up at this 575-ton flying building, 8 stories tall, getting ready to lift 600 people off the ground. The shadow of the wing falls behind you as you step away. Up at the cockpit, the captain runs his finger down the checklist one final time. The pushback truck rolls into position, and you realize something kind of wild standing there. This entire machine, every rivet, every wire, every kilo of advanced aluminum and composite, every drop of fuel in those 11 enormous tanks, exists for one almost stupidly simple reason. 8 billion human beings want to be somewhere they currently aren't. That's it. That's the whole story. We don't build giant airplanes because engineers are trying to show off, or because manufacturers are competing for the longest fuselage in the trophy case. We build them because we keep needing to be other places in larger and larger numbers, faster than the world itself can rearrange to let us. So maybe the real question isn't actually why the world keeps building bigger airplanes. Maybe the real question, the one worth sitting with, is what it would take for us to finally stop needing them. If you got all the way to the end of this one, the subscribe button is right down there. There's more like this on the channel.